Today we're going to jump back into screening tenants, how to screen for that qualified tenant. And so we're going to continue reviewing my ebook, which goes step by step, 7 proven steps to selecting a quality tenant. In the last episode we went through items 1 through 3, and then today we're going to go through 4 through 7. If you'd like to get the ebook, head on over to my website, successfulrental.com, sign up for my newsletter, and that'll be sent right on over to your email address. So again, let's go through the 7 steps. The first is a pre-screen tenant. The second is to physically show the property. The third is to have an application fee. To have a rental application. The fourth is to charge an application fee. Fifth is to conduct your credit and background checks. Sixth is to adhere to your screening criteria. And 7 is to charge a full first month's security deposit. So let's go ahead and dive in there. The rental application. Yes, you need to charge a rental application. It is part of the screening process, because I don't know about you. So my management company, we charge a rental application fee of $55 because we actually incur costs when we process rental applications. So that's to recoup those costs. It is definitely not a profit center for us. We actually lose money even when you factor in the time. We still lose money on even by charging $55, but we feel that that is a reasonable cost that we charge. Now, most tenants move in groups of 2. On average, not all the time. Sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 1, 2. I'm talking purely on average. So that's $110 to apply with my management company. I don't know about you, but I don't want to give away $110 for nothing. And so by providing our screening criteria up front and charging a rental application fee, regardless of what a prospective tenant tells us, they tell us their credit's great, they tell us their income's wonderful, they tell us they've never been evicted, whatever, fine, great and wonderful. They tell us all the good stuff when they see the property and during the pre-screening, but they're not going to pay us $55, $110 just for us to tell them no. And so that is so that rental application does several things for you. 1, helps recoup your cost of processing that application, and 2, it's actually a screening tool, because if someone doesn't meet your rental criteria, odds are, oh, hold on, let me turn off my phone. I apologize for that. I actually forgot to turn off the volume. Let me turn off the volume as well. On my phone. Alright, I'll have to come back and turn that off. Alright. There we go, volume's off. Sorry about that. So your rental application does several things. 1, it helps you recoup your cost of processing that rental application, and 2, it helps as that screening tool, because no one wants to be declined, and if they're going to be declined, they don't want to spend any money on it. Who wants to spend money and be told no? Like, that's just a horrible idea in my book. And so prospective tenants who know for sure they're going to be told no probably will not apply. And I say probably because some, like the professional tenants that I mentioned before, the ones that know how to game the system, they know most individual landlords do not process applications, even if they charge an application fee. And so there are tenants out there that only want to work with the individual landlord because they know that individual landlord won't do the credit and background checks. Like me, like a property management company, we do them. And so they avoid us and they go towards you, because they know they can get away with things. And so, but you know that's not true, and that's why you're charging the application fee, and then you're going to do step 5, which is to actually process that application. But before we go into step 5, let's stay on charging an application fee. Your state can govern how much you can charge for an application fee. Some states do, some states don't. Mine doesn't charge one. I live in South Carolina. They don't regulate it. Some states do. So check your state law on what you can charge. Do not charge an exorbitant rental application. And you might think, well, if we charge $100 for our application fee, only qualified tenants are going to apply. Wrong. People just won't apply because they're like, why am I going to waste that money? If there's 2 of them, that's $200 to apply. It's That's a lot of money, and they're not going to waste their time and pay for that because they know they'll qualify. They're just going to go on to the next property. So I've heard of application fees $200, $300. That is asinine. That is foolish. You want it to be a reasonable cost that recoups some of your cost for processing that application. And like I said, for my company, we don't recoup the entire cost, and that's fine with us because we don't want the application fee to be a deterrent for people applying. That's not good for our clients, and it's not good for our business. So I settled my company's fee on something that recoups some of the cost, but not all of it. So charge a reasonable application fee. And this next one is a real big stickler with me, and it happens with property management companies and some small landlords. If you accept an application fee, you better process that application. I've heard of landlords and property management companies say accepting 4 applications and 4 application fees, processing the first application, approving it, and then not processing the rest, and then telling them, hey, we accepted another applicant. You just committed fraud. You accepted money to do a service, process the application, and never did it. That is fraudulent. Will you ever get called out on that and be brought up on charges? Probably not, but it's pretty shitty to do. It makes you a bad human because you're accepting money for not something you didn't do. There's nothing more unethical and immoral within the realm of business of taking money for something you didn't do. I mean, yeah, there's lying, cheating, and stealing. Oh, wait, that is what you did. If you accepted a rental application and an application fee and didn't process the application. Now, if you take in 4 applications and you process the first one and you're like, you know what, this one's approved, I don't want to deal with the hassle, refund the applications for those other 3. That's totally fine. I'm not saying that you took the money, therefore you have to process the application. Return it to them. Save some time. Because my company, that $55 that we charge doesn't cover our costs. So if we took in 4 applications, 4 application fees, and the one person's approved, and then we process the other 3 just so we can say we processed them, we lose money. I don't want to lose money and time. That's just foolish. So we would just refund the application fee and call it a day and move on. So I'm begging you, be a proper business. If you're like, well, we need those application fees to, kind of make ends meet, you're not financially viable. I talked about that in the last episode, that the property owner's financial viability is an integral part of the tenant selection process. And if you view those rental application fees as your profit center to make your property work, you've lost before you started, man. Just sell your property and move on. I don't know what to tell you. Just don't do it. I hear it all the time, and anytime I hear about it, I tell people they're unethical and they need to move on, and it pisses people off, and quite frankly, I don't care. If someone is paying you for a service, you better damn well do that service. If you go to McDonald's and you buy a Big Mac that includes fries and a drink, and they just give you the drink and the Big Mac, don't you get pretty pissed? Because you're like, hey, I also paid for the fries. So this is the exact same thing. People are paying you for it, and then you need to go ahead and do what you say. I know I'm harping on it, and you think, why would I do that? I'm not. People do it, and it pisses me off, and it should piss off tenants. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of process applications as they come in, and as soon as someone's qualified, stop taking other rental applications. And so it kind of prevents that stuff from happening. So let's move on to step 5. So, as I said, some professional tenants, again, professional tenants are the ones that know how to work the system. They know that not everyone's going to process that rental application, so they're going to go ahead and do it. I once had a prospective tenant, I said, yeah, we can work with low credit scores, that's not a problem. We look more on recent credit history, so they applied, and when we got their rental application, I declined them, and I notified them, we're declining you. And they're like, why are you declining us? And I said, you have collections from utilities on your credit. The same utilities that you have to turn on when you move into the property. And they're like, oh, we didn't think that was that big of a deal. See, they didn't think we'd actually process the rental application, so we declined them and moved on. Collections to utilities are a big item in our book because we need utilities on, we need them in the tenant's name, and they need to be interrupted to take care of the property. You need heat in the winter, and you need AC in the summer to prevent damage to that property. And so those tenants banked on us not processing the application. And when we did, they were declined. Whereas, you know, a smaller landlord or a smaller management company that just doesn't, you know, they bank on the goodwill of people, they would have slid it by and it would have developed into some problems. So make sure you run your credit and background checks. So what should you include in those credit and background checks? That's up to you. That is for you to determine what you want to do. Now remember, when you pre-screen those applicants and you have your rental application, you already know what you're going to do. So, but let's recap it. Things that you can check. Income verification. Now, some people will actually call employers to verify income. I don't do that. W-2 is fine with me. Yes, people can forge W-2s and whatnot. In our area, that hasn't been a problem. If in your area that is a problem, then you might want to actually call the employer and verify. If someone cannot get W-2 statements to it, a pay stub, give us a pay stub, and they're like, hey, I can show you my bank account, well, then we need to actually verify employment by contacting the employer. Verifying employment through an employer can sometimes be an arduous process, especially if they work for a larger employer, especially in the healthcare industry. That is really hard to verify. And so, because you're going to have to pay extra fees, and it can take days to get that done. And some companies just don't do it, and they'll put you on hold forever. Tenants that know how to game the system know that and will give them as reference. Back before I started my management company, I actually fell for that one time. They gave me bank statements and they gave me the local employer. I called the local employer and it was just this whole big deal on verifying stuff, and I didn't want to go through it, so I just approved them. That was a mistake. I ended up evicting those tenants a few months later. And so, again, that was pre my management company, and now I don't fall for that anymore. Burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. So if they cannot provide that pay stub, a recent pay stub, then you need to contact the employer. And it does take a little bit longer, but so be it. That's what you got to do to make sure you're verifying that income. And then, so what should your income requirement be? That's up to you. What's normal in your market? That's what I would refer for you to look at. Stay in areas where it's more difficult to evict tenants. They have a higher income requirement because they want a less likely scenario of needing to evict that tenant, whereas in areas where it's easier to evict the tenant, some people are less flexible. So I've seen everything from like 2.5 times rent the whole way up to 4 or 5 times rent in monthly income. So that's up to you. That's something that you got to decide what works for your area. And then credit scores. I'm not a big fan of credit scores. Yes, we look at them as a quick and dirty way to verify things. I'm more interested in the recent credit history. And so because things that happened 6 years ago can still and will still significantly impact someone's credit score. But a lot changes in 6 years. If they have 2 years of good payment history, no lates, no nothing, I really don't care what their credit score is, because their credit history shows that, hey, the last 2 years have been great. That's what matters to me. And so the converse can be true. Someone can have a good credit score, but now they're actively missing payments because something happened and they're on the downswing financially. And so their credit score could be good and like, awesome, they've got a 710 credit score, a 690 credit score. That's way above my limit, so I'm going to let them in. But then when you look at their credit history, they're actively missing payments and they're on that slide down. You don't want to let them in your property because that's going to be a headache down the road. So I personally think that credit history is more important than credit score. And so that's how my management company's been designed. I also don't look at medical history. judgments on medical history. So many people have them, I just throw those out. And those judgments and collections on medical history pull down credit scores. I also don't look at defaults on student loans because there's just so much student loan debt out there that people have, and that pulls down credit scores. And so I factor those out. Now, I can't factor it out and recalculate a credit score. I'm not that smart. I leave that up to the credit bureaus to take care of and give me the credit score. But again, that's why I focus on that credit history from the 1 to 2 years. And I throw those two out because so many people have them. But if they have collections for their phone bill, utilities, other management companies, landlords, yes, that is a heavy factor in my book, and we look at those. And so where can you pull your credit score? Now, we do it through our management software. We use professional management software that management company uses, and so we pull it through there. But their back-end providers, TransUnion. Now, TransUnion SmartMove, so that's the one we use. Equifax and Experian each offer their own version of it. And so use any of the three if you want to go directly there. Or if you're using some sort of online platform for rent payments, a lot of people provide that service. Like Zillow has an option for it. Zumper has an option for it. Oh goodness, I'm drawing a blank on some other stuff right now. The big one, Cozy. That's it. Cozy's a big one that individual landlords use for online rental payments, and so they have a service where they, I think, can run that credit and background check for you. So there are a ton of online options. Not being able to pull the credit report is no longer an excuse. Now, 10 years ago, it was a little bit more difficult to pull that credit report. It took a lot more effort. Now, it's so easy to be done. And some of the companies, if you don't want to take care of pulling, if you don't want to collect that application fee, a lot of these websites will allow you to have the tenant pay it directly, so you don't even have to worry about it. You just go in there, set it up, and the tenant goes in, does their thing. They pay the provider the cost directly, and then they send their reports to you, so you don't have to worry about collecting that application fee, which is great if you don't want, so it makes it burdensome. It takes it off you, puts it on to the provider, the company providing that report, makes it easier for you to do. And so there's really no reason not to provide, except that application fee, because that company's doing it for you. Along with looking at the credit, the credit stuff, you also want to look at the criminal background. And your provider should be able to do that along with that with the credit history. You don't want to go in and look at numerous areas to get your reports, because the more difficult you make it on yourself, the less likely you are going to do it. So what should you require in your criminal setup? There's some federal laws that guide that. There might be some state and local laws that guide it as well. The way I view it, and I've set my company up, is how does it impact someone's ability to pay rent? The example I always like to use is a DUI or a drug charge 6, 7, 8 years ago. From a management point only, I don't care, because it's not going to impact their ability to earn income now. Now, if they have a drug charge or a DUI 2 months ago, now I care, because they could be going to jail and not able to pay rent. Or they could be losing their job. If their job requires driving, they could lose their job if they lose their license. And so then that's a factor in there as well. Now, what if someone has a drug charge 5 years ago, 2 years ago, and 6 months ago? Well, now that's a pattern of drug use that I don't want in a property. From a property management standpoint, I do not care what my personal views on drugs are. I don't care what your personal views on drugs are. How does that impact your ability, the tenant's ability? So if marijuana is illegal in your state, but you're pro-marijuana and you're like, I don't care about the tenant's marijuana use, that's a bad business decision, because that can impact your rental property if they were to get arrested and you can't pay rent now. So it's not a, how do you feel about drug consumption? It's a, how does it impact your property? Now, if you live in a state where marijuana is legal and they have some drug charges from before it was legal and you want to say, don't care, that's on you, that's fine. But in my state, it is illegal. So I do care from a property manager standpoint. My personal views on drug use is irrelevant. It doesn't even come into the equation because it doesn't matter. I care about what's legal and how are they going to be, how can that potentially impact their ability to pay rent. Violent crimes. A lot of people talk about, what about violent crimes? Like someone murdered somebody and they just got out of jail. Those are things that you have to answer for yourself. I've used someone who got arrested for an arsonist, someone who likes to burn things down. Well, you can't rent my house. Dude, like, if you burned down stuff before, I don't want you burning down the house. Like, no, that's a big problem. Someone who's been arrested for property damage, that's a problem for me because I don't want you damaging the property. So you've got to set that for yourself, and you got to do that before you start pre-screening, so that way you can convey that. Sex offender registry is a no-no in my book. I really don't care when that occurred. That's it. That for us is an automatic no, because I view it as when a property is listed on the sex offender registry, it actually devalues the property, because then neighbors will talk to new tenants and be like, hey, do you know a sex offender used to live there? And so those tenants aren't happy, because for whatever stigma that's associated with it moves on. And also from a moral standpoint, I don't even want to get started on that. So this is where my personal feelings do come in as well. Is sex offender registry no go? It's an automatic declination for us. Now that kind of sucks, because in our state, if you get caught peeing behind a bar at 2 a.m., you register as a sex offender. That's just kind of the way the dice fall. I don't make the laws in my state. I have to just live by them. And so we do filter all that out as part of our screening process. Other things that you can look for: eviction history. We get an automated eviction history through our process, through our reports. The problem is there are 3 filings in our eviction process in South Carolina. It doesn't hit the background check till the 2nd or 3rd. So that first eviction filing doesn't show up in eviction history. And also, if someone's actively going through the eviction process, it doesn't show up on that on that eviction search. So sometimes, if things are not matching up well, we'll go and do an additional search on that prospective tenant locally. So we'll actually go into county records, which we can do online, and search the eviction history to see what pops up. And that way, if they're actively being evicted, we'll decline them. Or if they've had a lot of first filings against them, we'll decline them for habitual lateness, because we don't want to deal with that headache. And so sometimes we do have to take that extra step. And really, the only time we take that extra step is when the background check comes up kind of questionable. Then we'll take that extra step. And also when the tenant, like remember I told you before, you physically show the property. And if what they are telling you when you show the property doesn't match up with the reports, then we also take that additional step. The checks that we do, like the background checks, they also give us a check, fraudulent check background, and also a terrorist watch list as well. So we also get that stuff. And there's other things that you can screen for that, that you got to figure out what's important for you. But the point of the story is, whatever you're screening for and you tell people you're going to screen for, you need to make sure you do it. And so that way you can follow through and find a quality tenant, which leads to step 6. Stick to your criteria. People do want to tell you stories, and they are going to say, hey, my family just needs a chance. We hit a hiccup. We need to get out. Like, give us a chance. We're on an upswing. And I agree, everyone deserves a second chance, but not in one of the properties that I own or that I manage. I want to see they've already gotten past that hiccup. Now, you might manage a property that that is more of a, people have already had a hiccup, so maybe it's on the lower income scale, and so they hit that hiccup, so you're in that and you give them. That's fine if that's part of your criteria that you have written out. But if you have your criteria set up here, well, if you're listening to a podcast, you can't see my hands. If you have that level, set up, at a certain bar, and then they come in lower and they don't meet your scale, Don't say, well, I kind of liked them and I want to give them a chance so that way and then approve them. No, don't do that. They either meet your criteria or they don't. The stories that they tell you cannot influence you if you want to make a good decision. Otherwise, you can end up with tenants that do not qualify based on your standards that you've set, and then that's going to cause a problem. And every time and I'm talking about 100% of the time that I did not follow my written criteria, I lived to regret it. I'm not talking about 1 out of 10 didn't work out or 9 out of 10 didn't work out. I'm talking 100% of the time. Now, I also have caveats built into my criteria, whereas if they are bordered like slightly below the criteria, but not quite there, we can approve them with additional security deposit in the form of last month's rent. So I have that built into the criteria that if they're borderline, that's what we do, additional security deposit in the form of last month's rent. Make sure it's legal in your state. And so then what happens is that lowers my risk and it lowers my client's risk because we have additional security deposit if things go south. Now we have the full month security deposit and the last month's security deposit. So we have essentially 2 months of security deposit on hand. And in my state, that eviction process can be done in a month or maybe up to a month and a half on average. And so that way they're out and it's all taken care of. And so I have it built into it's built into the process, written out on what we do if they are just slightly below. But if they're way below, that's not an option for them. So we actually have exceptions built into our written process. So that way, when there are borderline candidates, we can make a financial and risk-based decision rather or not, hey, do we like them? Because that's irrelevant, whether we like them or not, because it is a risk-based decision. All right. Oh, I just saw this bold item in my ebook here that is very important, so I'm going to read it verbatim. Well, I'm going to back up a little bit to the previous paragraph. So, here it is. That is when I realized I was subsidizing another family's living expenses at the cost of not providing for my family. And that's what happens when and that's when everything changed for me. Because it was at my family's expense when I was taking these chances. These people were literally taking money out of my bank account, which directly impacts my ability to provide for my family. And so that is the key. Your rental property is a business and your rental property is your investment. Your rental property provides income and financial stability for your family, not theirs. I'm a huge believer in charity and philanthropic work. And I do that separate outside my rental properties. My rental properties are not a charity. They are not philanthropic work. They are to provide income for my family and for my clients. I do charity and nonprofit stuff outside the realm of real estate. Do not combine the two. If you want to help families that are hard on their luck in housing, there are many nonprofits and religious organizations out there that you can work with. Do not allow your rental property to be one of them, where you directly take a chance on that tenant. You're providing for your family, not theirs. You always have to remember that it's your investment. When they don't pay rent, you're the one that has to come up with the capital to pay that that mortgage bill. All right, so moving on to step 7. Always provide for a full month security deposit because it goes to the financial viability of the tenant. If that tenant cannot pay first month's rent and security deposit, they are one sickness away from eviction. So that means if they don't have any savings, and if they miss work for a week, which isn't hard if you get the flu or bronchitis, break a leg, get into an accident, they're on the verge of eviction from that 1 week of missed work. And so it's very important that you charge that security deposit up front before they move in. With my management company, that security deposit is due before we sign the lease. We will not sign a lease without security deposit already submitted. And then the first month's rent's due before we give keys. And so that is non-negotiable for us. We do not split rent up over multiple months. We don't say, yep, half now, half later. Zero chance of that. It's all due up front. It goes to the financial viability of that tenant. And if they don't have it, we move on. We go to the next tenant. There are more fish in that pond. Your financial viability is vital to your rental property success, and the tenant's financial viability is also vital to your rental property success and the tenant's success. There are a lot of companies now coming out with, oh, $100 bond, we'll take care of the tenant. That allows you to give more options to tenants who can't afford that security deposit. And in theory, that sounds great because it opens your pool up to more people. But you're opening the pool up to more people who are not financially viable. So it's a horrible idea. Anytime a company calls me pitching that idea of, we lower the cost for tenants to move in, my response is, I don't care. You're opening it up to tenants I don't want in my property. I get it. Things happen to people and their bank accounts get drained. That's unfortunate. But this is an investment, and I have to make the best business decisions for those investment properties that I own, and then also for my clients. Again, this is not a charity. It is a rental property. It's an investment. It is a business. It is expensive. You know, our average rental is the market value is between $150,000 to $300,000. That is a ton of money. I mean, that is a lot of money. And I don't want to find ways to open it up to tenants who are not financially viable. It's just a recipe for disaster. And so, like, I have empathy for people who don't have the money and are down on their luck. But I can't help them. I need those rents paid. And you should have your rent paid as well. Don't look for ways to turn non-viable tenants into viable tenants. And do not spread that security deposit out. Let's say you do split that security deposit up over 4 payments or the first 4 months. What happens when they stop paying that security deposit? Are you going to evict them if they're paying rent but haven't paid the security deposit portion? And that's something you're going to have to ask yourself. Will you? Yes or no? And you'd be dumb to evict a tenant who's paying rent. Conversely, you'd be dumb to have a tenant in the property that doesn't have a security deposit for the performance of the lease. You put yourself behind an 8 ball when you agree to allow that security deposit to be paid over time. Just don't do it. You might want to do it to say, hey, it makes me feel good, I'm helping someone out. Don't. This is your rental property, your family's income, your family's investment. It just doesn't work out. I've done it. I know. I've been screwed hard when I have allowed tenants to split that security deposit up. And I will never, aside from state or federal law or local law coming in and telling me I have to do it, I will never do it. I can promise you that. Because it's a bad scenario. It always goes wrong. All right. Those are the 7 steps. I wrote this ebook back in 2016. I wrote that after 9 years of screening tenants. It's the same process I follow now, 4 years later, and it's what I'm going to continue following. So again, the ebook's called 7 Proven Steps to Selecting a Quality Tenant. You can go get it on my website at successfulrental.com. I implore you, if you want to find a quality tenant, follow those steps. You know, I'm not telling you what to do on your credit and background check or where to set your criteria and what to charge for an application fee or what to charge for your security deposit. I'm just saying you need to do all of those things. So I'm not telling you what you have to do. You have to do what works in your market, because what works in your market might be different than mine. But those steps or what you have to follow And that's the framework to getting to that quality tenant. So if you have any questions, sign up for the newsletter. That'll get you the email address, which you can then reply to and ask me questions, or head on over to Facebook, search for a Successful Rental on there, join the fan page and ask questions. All right, I appreciate you listening to my take on finding that quality tenant. See you on the next one.